All right. I hope you enjoyed your lunch and the sunshine on the terrace. I see that the speakers row is already complete and we have a very tight agenda, so I would suggest that we start soon on this afternoon session on the sharing and reuse of IT solutions and focusing now on solutions for access management and geospatial data. We have with us 9 representatives or solution owners shortlisted in the competition that was organized by the Commission, who are going to share their experiences today with us. For those of you that followed the morning session, questions are taken all at the end of the session, but you also have the opportunity to share your question via Twitter, and then we have someone following Twitter, and then questions will be brought up at the end. Also, a small tip for our speakers, when trying to change your slides with this small control, you should be pointing this direction apparently, and this helps the slides move to the next one. That's a lesson learned from the previous session. I didn't introduce myself, apologies. For those of you that were not in the previous session, I'm Nikos Loutas. I'm a senior manager with PwC Consulting in Belgium, and I will be your moderator for this afternoon session. Let's then already start with our first presenter, with Mark Wilmot from the Netherlands, who will be talking about their work on Aerius. And Mark, the floor is yours.
Okay, do the next one. Yes, thanks. So it's always good to be the first one after the lunch, so nobody has a dip yet. I will try to talk somewhat slower then. Yeah, thanks. So one of the few things I had above my desk when we did this project was always this sentence: different and new are relatively easy. Doing something generally better, that's very hard. So I want to try to talk to you in this 8 minutes about a little bit the context of the Aerius application. Did we do something different and did we do something new? Did we do something generally better? Something about the state of play that was requested by the organizing committee, and something about the next steps. So first, some of the Aerius is somewhat different, I think, from a lot of other contenders in this competition, is that the largest context for the Aerius application to even exist is an environmental challenge we'll have. A lot of people, or all people, know about the CO2 problems we have around the world with global heating. But when you look at the ammonia problem in the world, if you see that we only as humans have 10% impact on the natural flux of carbon and carbon dioxide, you see that in the ammonia, we have for nitrogen ammonia, we have almost 100% impact as humans on the total flux of ammonia around the world. So it's a much bigger problem, but it's also very difficult to solve the problem, because for carbon it's only simpler, just have fewer emissions, and then you can solve the problem. With ammonia it's more a nutrient cycle problem. So that's one thing. So that's the environmental challenge we face, why Aerius is even existing in the Netherlands and in Europe someday in the future. And then the context is an ICT challenge. So because this is more or less a policy problem, it's not simply solving an IT puzzle or connecting to programs or just, add to the situation where you now have 5 or 6 different kinds of software doing one job, just collect them and make them into one piece of equipment. For Aerius it's actually very more difficult, because we have an administrative process, which are the politics. So the politicians, they have a problem because they want to execute some plans, have economical development, which is limited by the amount of nitrogen emission you can have as a member state of the European Union. On the other hand, there's already a lot of data available for a lot of people, but it's not only the data you need. If the previous presentation was a lot about budget or budget cost or stuff like that, If you have a system like Aerius, you need to progress from you need to progress from these kind of numbers. So if you say you have to say you have an activity creates emission, you have to calculate where the emission is going, and then you have the emission, and then you have for example, the Nature 2000 area, and then for that you need an atmospheric transportation model, and then you can check whether this level of nitrogen emission is sufficient to reach the goals that are set by the European Union. So you have a lot more steps you have to take before you can answer a question that the politicians are asking. Also, a lot of different kind of users have to use this system, because the area system is used by a policy advisor to advise the politics on whether some kind of legislation has to be changed or implement measures to reduce ammonia emissions. On the other hand, you have a legislator from the government body, which is going to issue permits for activities such as farming or industries or roads or harbors. You also have an initiator, so someone who has an industry or a farm and he wants to expand this farm or build a new one, he has to request a permit. You have consultants, which help both the policy advisor or the initiator. You have NGOs, so a lot of NGOs are thinking, of course, that the government bodies are doing spending not enough time and effort to reduce the climate problem, so they will look at this application also for information to get to the government and talk about them. And there's still the general public. So did we do something different and new? Well, what really new is, and therefore different in the system, is that the Aerius system does a complete cycle. So if you see the blue lines, I'm not going into detail, but the blue lines represent the nitrogen cycle. And what we did, we built the Aerius application for each step in this process. So the politicians, they can use Aerius scenario to look whether they have whether it's cost beneficial to implement certain measures to reduce ammonia emissions. You have an Aerius monitor which monitors everything, and the legislator and the initiator, they can use Aerius calculator and Aerius register to request or issue permits for their activities. Did we then do something generally better? Well, the things that were given to us in the template presentation were easy accessibility, scalability, and reusability. Well, I think a lot of these buzzwords or terms are already used this morning. So what did we do generally better is that of course there are a lot of applications which can calculate the impact from for environmental studies, but there's no application yet, before there was Aerius, that had an API for other people to implement Aerius as an API in their own system. We set up an accredited information model. We have open data services in which we share not only the information we produce, but also the information that was not open data before. And for example, there's a validation service for people who create their own information. Well, scalability, that's more a technical discussion, but the whole system is built on microservice architecture. We use Docker or a message bus system to scale the application to the needs or the server load of the people that use the system. And there's a high, high retention rate of reusability because we only use open source software and comply to open standards. Not the same. Yeah. So what's the state of play, the usage? We're approximately per day 500 user sessions per day. And you see there we have a small group of users that use the application a lot, and we have, of course, a large group of users that only use the system infrequent, and that's because they only use the system when they have to request a permit. So they're not on a daily basis use the application, but still, if you look at the numbers for people who use it almost every day, if you run in a group of the 201 times per year, then there's also 15,000 people that are using this application. So the state of play of costs, that's not normally something we all brag about, I guess, but it was requested. So development cost over 6 years for this application was around 10 million euros. The maintenance costs per year are around 2 million euros. And if you look at the last 2 years that the application is in production, there's an estimated cost saving of public costs. So whether it's the government that has had some cost savings, or the businesses that had much more cheaper to request a permit, it's around 25 million euros. So within 2 years, the application already paid itself back. So then what's our next challenge? Well, this is the conversation that normally I think a lot of people should recognize. Politicians say, we have a problem. Then the IT people say, okay, in our case, we Scrum. We use the Scrum so we're Scrum to help you. And what we did build Aerius alongside the way that how the whole legislation process was developed also. It was a simultaneous development of ICT and the legislation. Then when we have solved the problem, the politicians say, okay, thank you, our problem is solved. And then we ask the next question, what about maintenance? We have solved your problem, but it should be state solved. And what about sharing? Because that's all what we're trying to do here, is that you see more and more government bodies using open source software that they can share later on. But that's also a step that still misses in the discussion after you have completed your project. So, and then the politicians already moved on to the next issue. So I think that's one of the key messages we should have learned. I don't know where the 8 minutes are, but...
I think we're more or less done with the 8 minutes, but thank you very much for keeping the time and being very aware for it, and for this presentation.